Hi everybody, this is a video to review what you know about the Articles of Confederation and to help set up the activity that you'll work on next. This is the first target in our content bubble on the American government, and the target today is I can identify the context of the Articles of Confederation in order to hypothesize its weaknesses. Alright, so first thing to think about is it's been a while since we reviewed the Revolutionary War and started talking about the formation of the United States. So think for a second to yourself, what kinds of challenges did Americans face after the Revolutionary War? Pretend it's 1783. What kinds of issues is this new nation going to have to deal with? Okay, so the Articles of Confederation, hopefully you'll remember, is America's first constitution. And a constitution is the framework, the rules for how a country is governed and operated. The Articles of Confederation were first created in July 1776. So at the very same time that the founding fathers were thinking about the Declaration of Independence, they're also thinking to the future and how will we run this country if and when we truly do become an independent nation. It wasn't ratified or agreed to by all the states and formally put into place until 1781. But this confederation, which means a loose alliance of political units, was the first attempt at operating a new and independent United States of America. And hopefully, as you remember, the agreement gave a lot of power to the states and not to the central government, which is why we call it a loose alliance of states more than one unified country. So some of the things that were included in the Articles of Confederation, one of the most important is that there was no chief executive, meaning there wasn't an elected president, there wasn't a king, there wasn't a prime minister, there was no single individual who was in charge, which kind of makes sense based on what the Americans had experienced under the British government. It also required for laws to be passed, 9 of the 13 colonies would have to approve. That's a higher threshold than a simple majority of 7 out of 13, more than half. And they wanted to make sure that 9 of the 13 colonies agreed to something before adding it to a national law. The legislative branch, or their Congress, also didn't have power to tax citizens. It could request money from the states, so it could go to Maryland or Pennsylvania or New York and ask for money, but it couldn't directly tax citizens themselves. They also couldn't draft an army. So it could ask states to send men to serve in a military capacity, and states themselves could form their own small armies. But the national government, the Articles of Confederation, didn't allow the Congress to draft an army and put it together. They also didn't have a court system, which made things a bit confusing when there were disagreements on how to interpret laws or states themselves disagreed with one another. There wasn't a court system like we have today under our Constitution to help settle those kinds of disputes. If amendments would be made under the Articles of Confederation to change the actual structure of the government itself or the articles themselves, all 13 states would have to agree. So if one state disagreed with an amendment, then it wouldn't pass. The Congress also couldn't collect state debts that were owed to the national government. So if states owed money for whatever reason to the national government, the Congress couldn't really collect that money. And they couldn't settle disputes among the states. So again, the states had a lot of power, and the central government didn't really have the ability or the authority to come to some kind of agreement between states if they disagreed with one another over some kind of law or a tax or exchange of goods. So with all that in mind, here's your activity for today. First of all, you should find in Canvas this activity, Articles of Confederation. So go ahead and download that to Canvas. At the top of the page, it's going to ask you to review a list of selected articles from the Articles of Confederation. For each one, your task is to explain the purpose behind including that article in the Articles of Confederation, and then to hypothesize a potential problem that that article could create. One thing to keep in mind is what we already know about the Revolutionary War and what happened between the colonists and the British. That might help you kind of think through why these articles were set up in the way that they were. So a first example is the very first article of No Chief Executive. The purpose of including that was that the states were afraid that a strong central leader would result in an abuse of power. Think about King George. And so they wanted to make sure that that didn't happen. But if we were to hypothesize a problem with that, it could cause a lack of leadership from the federal government, and there's no central authority figure who can make decisions for the nation, which might make it hard to get things done. Once you've completed that first page, then on the next, you're going to contextualize sources. So think through a list of challenges that Americans are facing in 1776, and then think about why the Articles of Confederation seemed like a good idea at the time when they were written. So we know now that the Articles of Confederation did not work well at all, but at the time that they were written, they seemed like a really good form of government. So what is it about the social, political, and economic context of the time that made a weak central government seem like a good idea? Once you've completed both of those tasks, you can submit this assignment to Canvas, and that should wrap things up for the Articles of Confederation. Thanks.